Hello everyone, welcome to my presentation on the architecture of Roman temples in the late Republic and early Imperial era. As you can already tell, I will be presenting this information by using the form of a Minecraft world. To begin, I'd like to start off by saying that many of these temples are not to scale, as it is impossible to get a one-to-one recreation in Minecraft. However, I will be showing pictures throughout the presentation so that you can get a scale of these buildings. Roman temples are visually quite similar to Greek temples, and it's obvious that inspiration was taken from them, as well as the general influence that Greek culture had over early Rome. However, they are not the same, and there are many differences between them. Much influence actually comes from Etruscan temples, most visually apparent in the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. An Erminium. The Roman temple we have here is a peripteral or peristyle temple. So, what is a peripteral temple, you may ask? Well, it's a temple with columns, or colonnades, going all around the temple. All four sides of the temple. So, Vitruvius, a Roman engineer and architect in the service of Augustus, wrote the De Architectura, the most influential book on the subject of temples. Roman temples can be classified by their design. Their design is based upon symmetry and proportion. They are classified according to the arrangement of their colonnades, or columns. There are three styles. This temple is a peripteral, as stated before. Here in Neapolis, we can see a pro-style temple. A pro-style temple is a temple that only has columns on the front facade, and everywhere else is just wall. This would be called the cella, but we'll get to that later. Here in Arretium, we can see a peripteral sine postico temple. This is a temple that has columns on three of its sides, but a wall on the back side. The structure of a temple is thus. A podium at the very bottom is for the temple to sit upon. Next comes the column, which itself is made up of three parts, those being the base, the column shaft, and the column capital. Next is the entablature, which is made up of the architrave, the frieze, and the cornice. And finally come the roofing and pediments. As seen in this graph, this is the structure of the standard Roman temple. If we focus on the columns, we can see there are different orders. There are many different orders in the Greco-Roman world. The main ones were Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. The Romans were most fond of using the Corinthian order. There was also Tuscan and Composite that the Romans added, but for our presentation we'll be focused on the main three. You can identify what type of column it is by looking at the column capital. So this one is Corinthian, this one is Ionic, and this one is Doric. Temples can also be described by the type of colonnades that were present. The Romans came up with a new architectural design, that being the engaged column. The engaged column are basically columns that hug the wall or cella of the temple. Unengaged or freestanding columns are columns that are, as they say, freestanding, which means they are not engaged to the wall. They were most common on Greek temples, but Romans also had them as well. What's also important to note is that this temple in Erminium is a pseudo-peripteral temple. It is pseudo-peripteral in the sense that it has freestanding columns in the front of the temple, here, these two, and the front of the temple is also called the portico, but it has engaged columns on the sides of the temple and back. So, the engaged columns are all around the cella. The number of columns on the front facade is also descriptive. Roman temples could be tetrastyle, hexastyle, octastyle, and Deca style. With this out of the way, we can now describe what the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus is like. The Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus would be called a hexastyle, golden Doric, peripteral sine postico temple. The reason for this is because we have gold Doric capitals. It's hexastyle because it has 6 columns in the front facade. And it's peripteral sine postico temple because it has engaged columns on the sides, but no real columns on the back. This temple in Arminium could be called a hexastyle, Corinthian, pseudo-peripteral temple. The most famous real-life example of this kind of temple is the Maison Carrée in Nimes, France. It is the best preserved Roman temple in the world. This temple in Arretium would be called a tetrastyle, Corinthian, peripteral sine postico temple. If we look here at this temple, we can see a tetrastyle, Ionic, pro-style temple. Here in Alexandria, Egypt, the Caesareum, or temple that Cleopatra built for Caesar, would be described as a tetrastyle, Doric, peripteral sine postico temple. Now that we've gone over some normal Roman temples, let's go check out some oddball ones. While the average Roman temple that comes to mind is of a rectangular shape, there are also round-shaped temples. The most famous of these may be the Pantheon and the Temple of Vesta in Rome. The Pantheon is one of a kind, so we'll come back to that later. The Temple of Vesta is the perfect example of a circular peristyle temple. It is shaped in a circle with engaged columns on all sides. It features a circular cella with the sacred fire of Rome inside. This is the temple that the famous Vestal virgins would take care of as they tended to the sacred fire. Here's a picture of what's left of the Temple of the Vestal Virgins in Rome. Here's a reconstruction of what it may have looked like. Here's the Pantheon. Like I said before, it's one of a kind. There's no real way to describe it other than it's the Pantheon. It has a portico, like a normal Roman temple in the front, but then a circular, spherical design on the back. Before I end the presentation, I should give you a tour of inside one of these temples. Inside a Roman temple, or inside the cella, I should say, would be this patron deity, or the statue of the god. Interestingly, Roman citizens could not enter the temple and was only reserved for the priest. It was considered a sacred site. The actual offerings would happen outside the temple, usually on an altar or platform. This temple does not have one here. And that's it! I hope you enjoyed learning about the architecture of Roman temples from the late Republic to early Imperial era. My sources are linked down below in the video description. Thank you all for watching.